All right, everyone. We have our next speaker at the Disruptive Public Education Conference. We have Superintendent Kuhn from Mineral Wells ISD. And before we get into today's topic, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsors. We have Wise Pies Media that's providing amazing content around public education. We also have our podcast, Educational Leadership Podcast. We have over 60 episodes with school superintendents and board members around Texas. And then, of course, we have Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's providing hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to districts around the great state of Texas, zero out of pocket to your districts, doesn't involve taxpayers, and it's recurring revenue every year. So if your district needs funding for higher teacher salaries or whatever it may be, reach out to Ideal Impact, or in the chat feature, just put funding in the chat feature with your district and your name, and we'll have somebody from Ideal Impact reach out to you. All right. With that being said, Superintendent Kuhn, thank you for being today's speaker.
Glad to do it. Thanks for having me. I want to say hi to a couple of friends of mine that are here, either as fellow presenters or attendees. And let me begin by saying my topic is artificial intelligence, and I'm not an expert on artificial intelligence by any means. For my fellow superintendents, I may be one step ahead of you on the implementation of AI in my school district, but I also might be 5 steps behind you. So if you sit through the presentation and don't learn anything, let me just apologize right here at the outset. The fact is, everybody on this call already knows quite a bit about AI just because it's all over the news right now. So my job today is to go a little bit deeper than the surface level understanding that we get from the headlines, and to talk specifically about AI as it pertains to the context of K-12 education. What impact will AI have on education? What impact is AI already having on education? Will it be a good thing? Will it be a paradigm-shattering boon that pushes student learning to the next level while simultaneously easing burdens on teachers? Or will it be a bad thing, an existential threat to student learning because kids are letting AI do their homework? Will it be a threat to the teaching profession? Will it be a threat to the entire education system as we know it? The reality, as you all probably already suspect, is that AI, like any other transformational advancement in human history, is going to be both. It's going to be a threat, and it's also going to be beneficial. You can look back through history and see examples like the printing press, movable type. When movable type was invented, it was a direct threat to an entrenched system. Some people earned their daily bread as scribes, manually copying manuscripts, old and new, onto papyrus and leather and later paper. And the printing press would put those people out of business. The skill set of a scribe became obsolete almost overnight. And the printing press wasn't just a threat to that working class population of people making their living writing things manually onto scrolls. It was also a threat to the elites because it instantly devalued a store of wealth that was held only by the richest and most powerful people of that time period. Making a scroll or making a book before movable type was extremely time consuming and extremely expensive. So books and scrolls and things like that were rare. They were expensive. And so a wealthy person who had accumulated a collection of books or a collection of scrolls, their library was sort of like the stock market. It was a store of value. It was something only the richest people held. And it was this massive investment, right? So movable type came along, and now books could be produced quickly, efficiently, and even cheaply eventually. So it was a threat to all facets of society, from rich to poor. AI is going to do what the printing press did. It's going to make some jobs completely unnecessary. And it's going to make some things that were previously hard to produce or time consuming to produce a whole lot easier and faster to make. It's going to reduce the value of certain products and certain services. It's going to devalue certain things down to zero. For example, I recently read that you might want to think twice before going to law school because AI can write amazing legal briefs. Now, that might be overstating the case, right? But it's something to consider. On the other hand, there was one trade union that I read about recently that came out and said AI is creating more work for them and not less. So there's a lot yet to be seen. AI is not just a threat, though. A lot of the headlines we read about today are all about kind of the negative side and the fact that it's going to disrupt the job market and change, the workforce. But it's not only a threat; it will be a boon to human productivity in ways that we can't even really imagine. And that's what happened with the printing press. It changed our world permanently in massive ways by making information more accessible to more people. AI is going to do something very similar to that, but I can't tell you right now exactly what, exactly how, exactly what it will look like. We won't know until later, until we see it happen. So I'll start by asking the question, what is AI? You all know it stands for artificial intelligence. And some people might think, well, it's just a big, super smart computer. That's essentially true. It is a big, super smart computer, except that big and super smart are wildly understating the facts of the case. I remember back in 1984, I had a teacher that taught my friends and me how to program computers in the basic language. I was in the 4th grade, and we were able to take these brand new computers, the first time I'd ever touched a computer, and make the computer do things that we wanted it to do using this simple programming language. And it was certainly cool. It kind of felt like magic. But the reality was, it was pretty simple. It was garbage in, garbage out. Whatever we put into that computer is what the computer kicked back out to us. Computers then, at least the ones that were available to consumers like us, computers then really didn't do anything other than what we told them to do. AI is not that. AI is something totally different. So last night I asked Chat GPT, which is the most used, most popular AI system or interface available to us right now. So I asked Chat GPT, how would you describe AI to a group of school superintendents in 50 words or less? And this is what Chat GPT spat out. Quote, AI refers to computer systems that can perform tasks typically requiring human intelligence, such as learning, problem solving, and decision making. It processes vast data sets, and it uses algorithms to recognize patterns, make predictions, and automate tasks. AI has potential applications in education, enhancing personalized learning and administrative efficiency. So the way I would describe AI is basically a simulation of human thought and creativity using massive computing power. AI is not a single super smart computer. It's entire systems of computers. And these aren't the kind of computers you can buy at Best Buy. These are computers that use $30,000 to $70,000 graphic processing units or GPUs. And it doesn't just use one of those. It uses multiple GPUs running in parallel. These GPUs, what they are, they're super powerful electronic circuit boards, and they were built to render complex three-dimensional graphics in real time. So when you play a computer game that creates a world around you and you navigate through that world forward, backwards, left, right, up, down, the GPUs were developed so that the computer could create those images instantly, super complex images with tons and tons of data points, right? And so developers pretty quickly realized that these tools, these GPUs, most of which are made by NVIDIA, that these would be useful for doing things other than creating 3D graphics. They can do other complex calculations extremely quickly. And complex calculations, that's what the human brain does on a daily basis, moment by moment, as we make decisions, as we prioritize, as we think through options. Our brain is doing what these GPUs do. So AI can do the most complex work that the human brain can do. It can process language. It can create artistic representations. It can write computer code. It can choose between competing options. It can prioritize. It can make recommendations. It can do so many more things that I don't have the time to list here. AI has already passed bar exams that humans struggle to pass. It's already passed AP tests and even harder tests than advanced placement tests. And one of the really interesting things to me about AI is there's no limit on the computing power that can be enlisted to make it even smarter and faster than it already is. 100 times smarter and faster, 1,000 times smarter and faster. AI systems are already able to do many things as well as or even better than we can do them, and they do them in a fraction of the amount of time that it takes us. So an important question is, will AI computational power outstrip human cognitive capacity? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. It definitely will. And it will happen faster than we think. In fact, it's already happening. And then once it does that, it won't look back. Developers will keep developing. Companies will continue to invest in these GPUs. They will continue to hire programmers. They will continue to develop their AI systems, competing with one another to make the fastest and the most powerful AI. And we can't even imagine what these systems will ultimately be able to do for us, or maybe to us. So I want to talk today about 7 points related to AI specific to K-12 education. Important point number 1, AI is not new. It may seem like a brand new technology because the way it's being covered right now in the media is completely breathless, and there's tons of headlines all the time. But the reality is artificial intelligence is kind of like a sunrise. The sky starts to lighten really gradually, and you don't even notice at first that anything has changed. You don't even realize that it's, not still nighttime. It's just a slow, gradual change. That's kind of where we've been with AI. It's been here for decades, vaguely impacting our lives. We just didn't really realize it. I'll give you an example from my life. Don't know if you've ever used Google Translate, but my teaching career before I went into administration, I was a Spanish teacher. And when you teach Spanish and you're on a staff where there aren't very many Spanish speakers on staff, you become the de facto translator for the campus, right? And so I spent a lot of my time as a teacher translating documents that were going to be sent home or being pulled into meetings to interpret verbally, conversations in the office. I would spend my entire conference period translating letters that were going home. And, I speak good Spanish. I, don't struggle with the language, but translating documents is a very slow and time consuming, thing to do. So at some point in the late 1990s, I started using an online translator, something just like Google Translate. It might have been Google Translate. I can't remember now which program I used, but I started using online translators to help speed up the process. And around that same time, my high school Spanish students, they also discovered online language translators, and they would use that to cheat and have it do their homework for them. And I will tell you that in the 90s, when this was happening, these programs were terrible. They were awful. It was very easy to spot cheaters because the language was incorrect in a lot of ways and in very predictable ways. In fact, when I would use it to translate for documents, it didn't save all that much time because I had to go back and correct so many things. I can tell you today, I still use Google Translate, and a lot of my staff members use Google Translate. And the situation I just described is no longer even close to being the case. When my communications director uses Google Translate, she'll always bring me a copy of the translation to look over it just to make sure that it's good. And what I've noticed over the past 3 to 4 years is not always, but way more often than not, it's literally perfect. Even when it's translating really complex content, really complex sentences and oddball verb tenses. So what's the difference between those early online translators and today's version of Google Translate? The early versions relied on human programmers to go in and do more coding when something wasn't quite right, when there was a bug or something wasn't translating correctly. They would have people go in and tweak and refine the translation programming. Today's Google Translate doesn't do that. It uses artificial intelligence. It uses a technology that allows the program to teach itself the target language. It teaches itself how the language works by scouring electronic resources. It teaches itself new vocabulary because languages are living things, right? So new objects, new inventions come along. They have to have a name in every language, right? So language never rests. Slang is constantly bubbling up from, the younger populations. Languages borrow from one another so that when the fax machine gets invented in the United States, people in Peru start using the word fax for a Spanish word, right? And so AI allows this real-time development of language for the translation application that's very similar to the way we learn languages. And now, in my opinion, Google Translate knows Spanish at essentially native level fluency. It knows better Spanish than I do. I'm not a native speaker. I learned Spanish when I lived in Peru for 2 years a long time ago. But my Spanish is pretty solid. It was good enough for me to pass the oral and written Spanish tests that TEA requires to become a Spanish teacher and an elementary bilingual teacher, and I actually passed 3 rounds of testing to be an FBI linguist. And so my Spanish is solid, right? So my Spanish isn't as good as Google Translate Spanish now. It's a lot better than it used to be, but it's not as good as it is now. So translation is just one example of how AI has already been in our lives for years. AI does a lot of other things and has been doing a lot of other things in our lives for some time. For example, your online shopping recommendations, predictive text on your phone. AI lets Siri interact with you in a fairly natural way. So even though AI has been around, it didn't really get our attention until 2022. That's when it really started to gain the headlines that you see now. And that's the year that the program ChatGPT was released by a foundation called OpenAI. It's a foundation, but it also has a for-profit entity kind of associated with it. They released ChatGPT together. The media took notice, and it suddenly dawned on us what was happening with AI wasn't just this faint, minor alteration of the way things are. It's a fundamental change, like going from night to day. So AI emerged gradually, nudging things a little bit here and there, making gradual improvements to software, adjustments that we noticed. They were nice, they were convenient, but they weren't really game changers, not necessarily. But with ChatGPT, it wasn't gradual anymore. Now the sun has burst over the horizon, and we realize things are fundamentally different. ChatGPT garnered 1 million users in 5 days. It had 100 million users in 2 months. It was and is the fastest growing consumer application in human history. So with AI, and I keep mentioning ChatGPT, that is one example of artificial intelligence that we can interface with easily. You can go to it right now on the internet and start playing with it. With AI, we're on the cusp of a tectonic shift across our entire human experience. Every single sector, every single profession that relies on information or communication, whether oral, written, or even representational, every profession that relies on organization or creativity, they will all be changed in fundamental, major ways by ChatGPT and similar technologies. So AI isn't new, but it's still really, really young. It's an infant, and we've only seen the tiniest glimpse of what it will grow into, what it will become, and ultimately what it will do. Important point number 2, you won't stop it and you won't avoid it. This genie will never go back in the bottle. In light of the current AI news cycle, in fact, the College Board, they recently republished an article from 1991 about what they called the Great Calculator Panic of the 1980s and 90s. It's a great read. So back then, at that time, traditionalists were urging schools to hold the line against the scourge of calculators in the classroom, right? And while this was going on, while people were fretting and fearing that calculators were going to come into our classrooms and kids were going to forget how to do math, while that was happening, behind the scenes, companies like Apple were quietly developing little handheld supercomputers that we would all start carrying in our pockets in 2007 with iPhone 1. The reality was the traditionalists back then in the 80s and 90s, they were never going to stop calculators from invading the math classroom. They were never going to do it. And the impact that they were worried about, that kids wouldn't learn math because the calculators would do all the brain work, that isn't what happened. That is not what materialized. The anti-calculator folks from back then, they suffered from a lack of imagination. They could only imagine the worst case scenario. The College Board article I'm talking about, it actually starts with an interview with a first grader from that time period, from the year that it was published in 1991. And the first grader is talking about how great calculators are in her classroom because, in her words, they let her, quote, know big numbers. So calculators, that's just one example. There's a lot more from that article, but calculators really didn't thwart math education. They just transformed it. They changed it fundamentally. Now that the machine was doing the calculations, high schoolers began doing higher level work, using their classroom time learning how to do things like create graphing functions and write calculator programs. The simple calculations that the calculators were doing for them freed up time for them to learn other more complex things. The calculator wasn't a crutch that made them forget how to walk. It was a jetpack that enabled them to fly. So today we're in a very similar situation. We can't predict what AI will do. The mishmash of outcomes will be negative and positive. But I believe that you as a superintendent, school administrator, would be wasting your time if you spend your efforts and your energy trying to keep AI out of your school. You can try that. You can invest in programs that promise to detect essays written by AI, and AI can write essays. It can write really, really good essays. In fact, I think in my school district, we have, 520 staff, ton of English teachers, communications director, people with doctorate degrees. I honestly think AI is the best writer that I have on staff right now. And I like to write, but I'm not as good a writer as AI. So yeah, AI can write really good essays. So there are programs that promise to detect those essays, but here's what's going to happen. In my opinion, the programs will not work. This isn't like plagiarism, right? You're all aware, I'm sure, of Turnitin and other plagiarism detectors where a program will scour the internet and it will match up words and phrases and it will detect if a paper's been plagiarized. But AI programs, they write original papers. They don't plagiarize. An AI program will do exactly what your teachers ask their students to do because the kids will go home and ask it to do what your teachers ask them to do. And they can tell AI to write a paper in the style of an American teenager. So one thing I did in preparing for this, I asked ChatGPT to rewrite Genesis 1:1 in the parlance of an American teen. And I'm going to read that to you now. Quote, in the beginning, God created like everything, he totally made the heavens and the earth, and it was like empty and dark and stuff. And God was like hovering over the waters, ready to make things rad. I'm going to say I think ChatGPT missed the mark with the word rad there. I haven't heard a kid say that in a really long time. Other than that, though, it's pretty convincing, right? AI ultimately probably already is, and if not already, it will be too good to catch, especially if a student is smart enough to take what the AI generates and then revise it and make it more natural and put it in his or her own words. So what do we do? In my opinion, we account for AI just like we account for calculators. If you assign homework to be written at home, you should probably assume that enterprising kids will let AI write their paper for them. And you could say, oh, that's a moral failure of the kid. The kid's copying, the kid's cheating, it's intellectually dishonest. I'm not saying that's not true, but I think kids have always cheated. Right? I mean, I don't think that's a new problem that kids would take advantage of the resources that are available to them. I think they've always done that. So I think it's less of a moral failure on the part of the student and more of a failure of imagination on the part of the teacher who created an assignment that doesn't account for reality the way it is because they're stuck thinking about a reality that used to be and no longer is, right? I think that's a failure of imagination on the part of the teacher. If you want to see student writing, you can have them write something on paper in class in front of you while you're monitoring. Then they'll write something. But even that to me is a failure of imagination now because AI gives us opportunities to go to a whole other level of teaching writing. AI can help us help kids write better. There's going to be a host of great AI-infused assignments that will emerge organically over the next months and years as thousands and thousands of teachers realize what they can do with AI. We're still at the very beginning of this, so those lessons are a little hard to find right now, but they're coming, rest assured. I can imagine one example. You could have a student write an informational paragraph about a topic of interest during class while you, the teacher, monitors to ensure it's their own work genuinely. And then at the end of the class period, if there's a little time left, you can do some peer review, let the kids look over each other's work, polish it up. And then when the bell rings, you can assign homework. You can tell the kid to go home and have ChatGPT write its own paragraph on the exact same topic. The next day, you can ask students to share their papers and the papers that GPT produced for them. And they can compare and contrast. And then you can ask them what they would like to change in their writing based on what they saw from ChatGPT. To me, that's a great learning activity that takes advantage of ChatGPT and AI technology, and makes it part of the lesson. Important point number 3, AI is not perfect. It's important for us to understand that AI is not a superhuman technology. If you play around with it, you'll see its limitations quickly. One major issue, for example, something called hallucinations. You can ask ChatGPT for literally anything, and it will give you what you ask for. But here's the thing. If it can't find the information you're asking for, sometimes it will just make stuff up, completely fictional, made up out of whole cloth. Earlier this year, there were 2 lawyers in New York, and they decided to use AI to help them write legal briefs for a trial. They were fined $5,000 by the judge because the part of the brief that was written by AI included legal cases that had never happened before. The AI, in making its case, chose to just make up legal cases and then cited them in the brief that was submitted to the judge. The judge was not amused. And so it's important for us to remember that we have to use AI with a full awareness of its limitations. There's a whole lot of other examples of people using AI and then not catching that it's not perfect. But that's just, I'm going to save time and just share that one. Important point number 4, AI can assist school administrators. Consumer AI is the domain of the young. 3/4 of AI users are people born between the early 1980s and the early 2010s. School administrators, we're not really using these technologies as often as our students or even our youngest teachers. So we don't fully understand all that these applications can do to help us. We will be using AI ultimately, whether we want to or not, unless we retire and get out of the business before that happens, because the world around us will change. It's going to happen. So every minute that one of your team members or you spends learning AI, playing with it, thinking about it, seeing what it can do, every minute that you or one of your team members plays with AI and learns it is an investment that ultimately can pay off with hours of saved time and saved effort and improved quality of the products that you put out in your school. Key players in your organization need to have a functional understanding of what AI is, what it can do, what the AI programs that are available are, how to get to them, how to access them. They need that understanding, and the sooner the better. So the first time I used AI in my job was on July 30th, 2023. I wasn't totally unfamiliar with it at that time. I'd read about it a lot. And then on top of that, my oldest son had come home from college, and he had introduced me and his siblings to an AI-based image generator, a program called DALL-E. It's spelled like Wall-E, the movie, but it's a play on the name of Salvador Dali, the artist. So it's DALL-E. So he came home and he was like, "You guys aren't going to believe this. Y'all have to check this out." And we got on his laptop, we sat on the couch, and we spent a couple of hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours, telling this program to generate the dumbest images you can imagine, and then just laughing over and over again, and also being surprised at how good these images are. You can tell this program, DALL-E, anything. You can tell it to draw or create any image that you can imagine, and it will usually nail it. And you can tell it what style. You can say, "I want it comic book style," or "I want it to look like a Rembrandt painting," or "I want it to be photorealistic." And we told it the dumbest stuff you can imagine. We just let our imaginations run wild, and we just laughed and laughed, right? So that was my familiarity with AI. That was my first experience with AI. But on July 29th of this year, I was relaxing at home. I was reading news articles on my phone, and I just happened to read an article about Google Bard. Bard is Google's competitor for ChatGPT. It's a text-based AI resource that you can just tell it what you want and it will produce it. It's like a search engine on steroids. And so I read this article about Google Bard, and then I said, well, I'm going to go check it out, play around with it, just like I had played around with this image generator before. So I logged into it, asked it several questions, just goofing off, making it generate different kinds of content, trying to figure out, what's all the hype about? How is this possibly ever going to be useful for me? And I was impressed by the quality of what it produced. I was, taken aback a little bit by just the open-endedness of, I can ask this anything, literally anything. It was, my experience with it was a lot like my experience with that program DALL-E, because I was just kind of blown away by the quality of what it could produce. I could ask it anything, and I could have had Google Bard write this presentation, and it probably would have been a much better presentation if I had. So the reason I remember July 30th as the first time I ever used AI on the job isn't because July 29th, the reason I remember July 29th isn't because I used Google Bard that night. Something else happened that night. The reason I remember that specific date is because there was a tragedy in my town, in my school community, late that night. I finished messing around with Google Bard and I went to bed. And after I was in bed, I got a message. One of my students had been injured late that night from the accidental discharge of a firearm. It was very late when I found out that this had happened, around midnight, maybe later. So it was really too late for me to, send out any messages or anything to people. So the next morning, as soon as I woke up, I began to inform my board and other administrators of what had happened, and got up, got ready, and I went to church. And so I was sitting in church, and it occurred to me as I was sitting there that we needed to push something out to the community. The community needed to hear from the school district about this incident that had occurred. It was a Sunday. Nobody was working. My communications director wasn't answering her phone because I'm sure she was in church as well. So I was like, I've got to do something, and I've got to do something quick, right? So I slipped out of my seat and I went into the church lobby, don't tell my preacher, and I called the local police department, an officer that I talked to quite a bit, and I just asked, would the PD have a problem with me pushing out kind of a generic message about this incident? I know it's under investigation and everything, but we need to let our school community, our school family, know that we're aware of what's going on and that we're taking all the necessary precautions as a school district. But I had a time crunch because what had happened had already been shared on Facebook, and the comments section, as I monitored it, was filling up with speculation. And I wanted to put something official out on behalf of the school district as quickly as possible before the online commentary spun up a bunch of false narratives, started bashing the ISD for not informing parents, that sort of thing. I only had my phone on me. I didn't have a computer because I was in church. And so this may be right, it may be wrong, I don't know, but here's what I did. I went to Google Bard, which I had learned to use the night before, and I wrote a prompt that said something like this, quote, write a statement from a school to parents related to a tragedy involving a student being shot off school grounds on the weekend. So again, I don't know if that's right or wrong. Maybe such a statement needs a more personal touch, right? But based on the time crunch, based on the situation and the quickness, I wanted to get something out. That's what I chose to do. What would have normally taken me 30 minutes to an hour to write and rewrite and refine was generated literally instantly. And I read through the statement that Google Bard produced, and it was great. I made a few minor changes. For example, I mentioned hallucinations earlier. Google Bard randomly in the middle of the statement just decided that this incident had happened at the city park, but that wasn't true. That was a hallucination. So I had to take that out, had to clean it up a little bit, and that maybe took 2 minutes. So in 2.5 minutes or less, I had a statement that was as good or better as anything I could write. And so we posted it. I sent it to the police officer and made sure he was okay with it. We posted it and everything was fine, right? But I do want to note a risk here. Vanderbilt University had a very similar experience, right? There was a school shooting, not at Vanderbilt, but at another university, I think at University of Michigan. And Vanderbilt chose to put out a statement, and they used ChatGPT to write their statement. They had to issue an apology, and it became a national news story. This was back in February. They used AI to author an email that they sent out, a mass email they sent out about that mass shooting at Michigan. So when I read about that, I went and I found the email to read it. And I was wondering, like, what went so wrong, right? It's not that it's foolproof. AI can generate really screwy stuff sometimes, but generally speaking, something like that, you're gonna take what AI produces and you're gonna read it before you send out the email, right? So I was real curious, why did they have to submit an apology? Why did they have to put out an apology? I read the email. It was literally perfect. It was the perfect statement. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. What they did wrong was there was a little citation in very small print at the bottom of the statement that said produced with ChatGPT. So people were offended, not at the content of the email, but at the fact that the email was produced by a robot and not by a human being. It was too impersonal given the content of the email. But if you were to read the email itself, and you find it online, and it didn't include that citation, in my opinion, you would have no idea that that wasn't written by a human being. A human review of any document or presentation produced by AI is absolutely imperative. With the statement that Google Bard helped me create, I don't personally see it as me using AI to do my job. Nothing will go out on my letterhead without me reviewing it and okaying it first. And sometimes now, when I'm pulled in several directions at once, I'll have my secretary write things for me, and then I'll come and read it, sign it, and it will go out, right? I'll check it before we send it out. This was the same concept, but my secretary wasn't available on Sunday. I was still the backstop. I was still the guardrail. I was still there to ensure that the messaging was appropriate. AI was a facilitator. It was a speeder upper. I got the statement written on my smartphone in my church lobby, and I got the PD's blessing on the statement. I put it out, and all this took about 5 minutes, and it was a great statement. So ever since that experience, I've shared that experience with my staff. My central office staff has been using AI a lot this year, a ton. My communications director uses it for almost every social media post, and I can tell because I note the difference in what we're putting out in terms of the language, in terms of the descriptiveness. My executive director of special programs is a huge fan of specifically of ChatGPT. I showed her Google Bard, and she decided she liked ChatGPT better. So she'll often volunteer to compose emails and flyers and presentations and invitations. And she always does it using ChatGPT because she likes it. She thinks it's fun. I can tell when something's presented to me for approval and it was written by AI because it's so polished, more polished than what I'm used to seeing when my staff write things and hand them to me to look at. My only complaint is sometimes it's a little too flowery. Sometimes it uses too many adjectives. Sometimes the language is just a little bit off. I'll give you an example. We had a social media post recently, and we had won a game, maybe a volleyball game, and we had played kind of a subpar opponent, like it was a game that we were supposed to win. And so the message that went out, it said, really super proud of our Lady Rams for this remarkable win. And I did not like the word remarkable. Remarkable, it means great, it means good, but it also means kind of shocking, kind of surprising. Well, this was not against, a great opponent. And so I was really kind of upset with that language right there. So that's an example of the kind of thing that you still need human eyes looking at the things that AI produces. Human oversight is totally necessary. AI can help with communications. It can help with translation. It can also help with decision-making. You can ask it for advice. Yesterday, I asked ChatGPT this question: how can a school superintendent get a subordinate to stay in their lane? It gave me 9 tips, and every one of them was rock solid. And it ended with this line. I want to share this line with you because I like it. It said, it's crucial to handle this situation with tact and professionalism to maintain a healthy working relationship while ensuring that everyone operates within their designated roles effectively. There are tons of ways that AI can help administrators. It can design staff training. It can help you find sources of staff development. It can summarize research for you. It can design meeting agendas. The list is as endless as your imagination will take you. Okay, the following points are going to be a lot shorter because I'm running short on time here. Important point number 5, AI can also help teachers. The most obvious use case for AI in the classroom is creating lesson plans. AI writes great lesson plans, really great lesson plans. You have to be careful because writing a good lesson plan is kind of part of the art of being a teacher. And so some teachers really enjoy that ability to be creative and to design their lesson plans. It goes to the heart of what they do. And there's a quote that Mike Moses shares all the time: people like to see their own splash. So you have to be careful about ripping away something that gives teachers enjoyment in their job and turning it over to AI. But teachers are super busy, and writing a year's worth of lesson plans is a lot, right? So when teachers realize they can automate the process of creating lesson plans, that might be welcome news to them. And of course, they still have the opportunity to go in and refine what AI produces and make it their own. For some teachers, that could actually help their teaching, right? So you can go into ChatGPT anytime and ask it to create a lesson plan. And I have done that recently. I asked it to give me a lesson plan based on an Algebra 1 TEKS objective. And it gave me this work of art, a 2-class period lesson plan, complete with everything you can think of, the necessary materials, the phases, and the time period for each phase of the lesson. It provided extension activities, and it provided assessment types. I need to note that you have to tell it you need to teach to the Texas standards, or it could produce something for another state standards. Another thing you need to know is sometimes it will produce a pretty vague lesson plan, so you'll need to go in and tell it more specifically what you're looking for. So in my case, with the lesson plan that I had it generate for algebra, I went in and created a follow-up, and I said, hey, this is a good lesson plan, but can you create an assessment for it? And it said, certainly. And then it gave me a quiz with 3 multiple choice questions, a short answer question, a graphing task, a task related to real world data, and a scenario that asks students to create an equation based on sales data. AI can create assessments. It can do so much more, from worksheets to writing prompts to posters to hang on the classroom wall, flashcards, seating charts. It can also give teachers advice on every topic that your teachers might need advice on. Classroom management, how to get along with your coworkers, questioning strategies, how to use available technology tools to improve their teaching, specific teaching techniques. It can identify activities tied to certain concepts. The only limit, again, is the teacher's imagination. Important point number 6, AI comes with dangers, right? So how do you remediate those dangers in a K-12 school system? You can take, as a school administrator, you can take several steps to remediate the potential dangers of AI. It's important that you know what they are. So the first thing you should do, educate students and staff about AI and about the potential risks of AI in education. Number 2, ensure the ethical use of AI. You need to, with your teachers, with your staff, with your campus improvement planning, district improvement planning folks, establish guidelines and policies for the ethical use of AI in the classroom. I haven't seen a lot of policies yet coming out of TASB about AI, but I'm sure that's in the offing. Ensure that your AI technologies always respect students' privacy and foster a positive learning environment. So be watching for policies that other folks are making. There are bigger school districts that already have some policies and procedures that you can find online. Number 3, data privacy and security. Work with your technology staff to make sure that data privacy and security are taken into account. Some AI programs only work if you create an account. Some AI programs, whatever data that you type into it, it's going to store that, and it's going to know that about you if you put personal information. Number 4, bias and fairness. Be aware that AI systems have biases because humans have biases, and we made these systems. So be watching for bias and be warning people about that in AI systems. Number 5, have regular audits and evaluations. Assess the impact of AI in your school system. You can use staff surveys, student surveys, feedback sessions. You can monitor student performance after AI has been implemented in your school. Customization and personalization. Use AI to tailor education to individual student needs, but ensure that teachers still have a central role in designing and delivering education. Teacher training is number 7. Look for training for teachers and educators about how to effectively and safely integrate AI. And if you can't find any, ask AI to create a script for you and lead that training yourself. Number 8, parent and guardian involvement. Make sure parents and guardians are informed about the use of AI in education and how it may affect their children. Number 9, continuous learning. Stay informed about developments in AI and education. Number 10, collaborate with experts. Find and follow experts on social media who know about AI ethics, education, child psychology. That will help you develop guidelines. Number 11, regularly update your policies. Review and update AI-related policies regularly to ensure they remain effective. And this is something you're going to have to do over the long haul because AI is going to evolve rapidly. Okay, so that section right there, number 6, important point number 6, that was all written by ChatGPT because I was running out of time. I have one last section. I have 1 minute to get through it. And this is important point number 7. I wanted to share some specific AI programs that are available for you to use right now. So the one I've talked about the most is ChatGPT. You can find that at openai.com. It's text-based. It's basically a search engine on steroids. You do have to have an account. Version 3.5 is free. Version 4.0 is way more powerful, but it requires a subscription. Google Bard is another one I've mentioned. It's located at bard.google.com. Same thing as ChatGPT. It's free, but it does require a Google account. DALL-E is the image generator I mentioned. It's available at labs.openai.com. You describe what you want to see, it will create it. You have to have credits to create images, and when you run out of credits, you have to buy more. There's another program called 11 Labs. It's found at 11labs.io. You have to spell out the word 11, and it will take text and turn it into speech, but it can also take a sound file of someone's voice and create speech in their voice. You can make other people say things that you want them to say, which I will admit is a little bit scary. And then there's another one called Studio D-ID. It's located at d-id.com. That allows you to take a photograph of a presenter and turn it into a video of them mouthing an audio file that you upload. You can make a selfie or a photo of somebody talk. And you can use, they have built-in presenters, but you can also upload a photo of yourself or someone else, and you can create an animated video of that person giving a presentation, complete with the audio that you just created in 11 Labs using a script that you had ChatGPT make for you. So those are just a few of the AI programs that are currently available, readily available to the public. There are many, many more that you can learn about by a simple Google search. My advice is familiarize yourself and your leadership team with AI now. Start talking to your board about it, about what it might mean for your students and your teachers, and begin to generate appropriate policies and regulations and processes and procedures related to AI. Above all, make room for AI in your school, because it's coming whether you get ready or not. I appreciate your time today. I hope you gained something useful from the presentation.
Oh my gosh. I love this. I was like taking notes so fast. So first, Gary, can you see if there are questions? Because I don't want to take up time for questions, me talking if there are questions.
Yeah, if there's any attendees or panelists with questions, we can start with those. You can use the Q&A box or the chat feature at the bottom there. So we can answer those first if you have any.
So while you're looking, I'll go ahead and talk because I'm so excited. I was kind of skeptical for sure. I'm working on my dissertation right now, so definitely not going to look up things. I don't want anyone to ever come back and say I did anything, no one needs to get in any trouble academically. But at my institution where I work full time, the president did say, I want you to play around with, he told our entire staff, faculty and staff, that we should be playing around with this and figuring this out. Like, we need to figure out. So that day I went to my office and I was like, all right. And I in ChatGPT asked the question, what do student leaders need to improve motivation while working full-time in school and being a student leader, whatever. I asked it a question and it spit out something that I knew the answer to. Like, I know that's my area, student development. But it was beautiful to see, like, am I missing anything? Does the research show anything? Or other universities? Is anybody talking about motivation and so I think we can't be afraid of it. So I love how thorough your presentation was. I love the vulnerability of saying that you used it. I like that you pointed out that the university that used it and then didn't take that away. Like, it, because sometimes our intent is one thing, but then what actually happens is different. And so we have to be very careful with this, but we have to start using it. Gary, I know you probably have things to say. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I really like the point you made early on about how the calculator, when it was being developed and it was being implemented, and just kind of the mind. And you see that with social media, like when social media first started, making its impact, if you will. And then there was an article I read at one point, and it was talking about when the television was developed, going from radio to television. There was all these there was all this fear around it that was being generated, and you definitely see that with ChatGPT. But I like the fact that you were mentioning that it's a tool, right? It's a tool that can be used to really help expand the minds versus something to be afraid of. So yeah, go ahead, Corinne.
Oh, I know. There's so much. There's so much to say about this one, and it's a tool, and I think what I really liked in the beginning is that you mentioned that this will end some jobs. Like we have to just say like it is. This will change. And but the other thing that we want to make sure we're thinking of is that we've been saying for years that we are preparing students for jobs that we don't know will exist. The average second grader, this was like a stat we used 10 years ago, the average second grader will have a job we don't even know how to explain. Then who knew during COVID how Zoom and all of these things would become so much a part of our daily life? So I think that we have to get on top of this. We have to talk about it. So I'm so glad that you are using it and you gave us some structure and how to use it and let us know it is better than it's a better writer than me, but it is not better than me. It's a better writer than me. And I think that's the thing. It's not better than me. And so we're not gonna become obsolete. There's no way I can figure things out without a calculator. My brain's just not like that. But you also would never throw it. An engineer won't be able to do the job that I do with students. And so it's not. We've got to figure it out. So okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's so new. I don't even think people know what questions to ask around it. It's just so it's such a new topic, and nobody knows the right answer around it. But that's the purpose of today's conference. These are disruptive topics. So early on, we had a topic around revenue sources. Then we had another topic around safety, and we had we've had just so many great topics today so far, and we're only like halfway done with today. We have all these presentations in front of us, all these different topics. And I think the listeners, whether you're live right now or you're listening to the recording version, because the recorded version we're going to have on our podcast channel, we're going to have on our YouTube channel, we're going to have on the Wise Pies Media website. So there's going to be a lot of different ways to absorb this content. And but for those of y'all that have been on the live version of this, we just want to thank y'all for taking time out of your busy day, because we have a lot more speakers that are coming up. And Superintendent Kuhn, anything else you want to add? Just any kind of last words of wisdom before we close out?
No, I think Corinne made a really good point. It will, we'll lose some jobs, but there will be brand new jobs we don't even know about. And you're already seeing some of that. You can read some headlines about prompt writers for AI that companies are hiring and paying really well. And these are people that have, gotten some experience using ChatGPT and programs like that. And so companies are hiring those people. And, going back to the calculator analogy, ultimately, you're right, Corinne, this tool is not, it may be a better writer than us in the same way that a calculator is better at math than an engineer. But ultimately that calculator is carried around in the hands of the engineer who uses that to build, magnificent structures and things like that. So ultimately that to me is the future of AI. It's going to be a tool used by people to do things faster, better, than they were able to do them before. So I don't know that we should worry too much about it replacing humans. I think it's going to make us more capable at all the different projects and tasks that we take on, including educating kids. And the other thing I'll say before I run out of time, there's no technology, going back to the TV comment that you made earlier, Gary, there's no technology that has come along since public schooling became what we do back in the late 1800s. No technology has come along that didn't make its way into the schoolhouse. So when TVs came along, they showed up in living rooms first, but they showed up in classrooms after, and the same thing has happened with cell phones. Teachers use cell phones all the time in their classroom to do, polls and surveys of kids and do little spot quizzes and things like that. Calculators replace scientific calculators replace slide rules, and AI will find its way naturally into our classrooms and will benefit our students and our teachers, and will, like I said, it will transform education. But it's ultimately just a really fancy tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing like literally how you use it, like giving us that example, because I think the day I did it at work, I was like, I was just, I was, I took a picture of myself in my office that day because I'm like, this is something I don't want to forget. The other thing is, it's almost like I had a brain partner for a minute because, like what you said about the hallucination, I think you said it came up with some stuff that I know is not true. And I was like, what? And it got sassy with me, actually. Like, that's something we should talk about. It was like, it knew that I knew, and it was like, it made me like feel dumb for asking the wrong question. And I was like, oh no, like, I'm actually an expert in this field. So I think that's like, why not have fun with some of this stuff? Our kids, my son said, Mom, it's another app to me.
Yeah.
It's like, to them, it is one among many apps, and to
Yeah.
us, like me, as a I was a school board member, it was like a fear, and to them it's one among many, so
Yeah.
we got to figure it out.
I think talking about fear too, like for us, because it is a little more distant from our experience, it's a little more impressive to us what it does than that generation, because that
Yeah.
generation, they've eased into it. They've had a lot more experience with a lot more applications that do really cool stuff that we skipped over a lot of that, and now we're seeing Chat GPT. So I think we're a little bit astounded, and some of that comes from a place of like trepidation and fear. But I think the next generation, our kids, like you said, it's just, I've seen cool stuff. This is the next cool thing. It's more of a stair step for them, and for us, it's this giant leap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your vulnerability in the way you explained it and described literally your steps of using it, that's helpful. I mean, that's like provided a roadmap. I'm sure we have superintendents who haven't tried it. I just tried it in July, and being very careful not to use it in the wrong spaces. But so your examples are helpful. So I encourage people to get on and try it. It's something that we need to get ahead of. We're going to be writing the policies. That's the other piece I think you mentioned. We're the ones writing the policy. And if we're not careful with this, we can miss out on something that can benefit our children. So we want to definitely be good stewards of the policies that we're writing regarding this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The technology is not going away, and we don't want to be late to the working with it. So yeah, asking the right questions is critical. I like that. Okay, well, thank you again, Superintendent Kuhn, for the topic today. If anybody has any additional questions, what's the best way for them? Okay. There you go. What's the best way for listeners, whether it be live or virtual or the recorded? What's the best way for them to get in touch if they want to ask you more questions about it?
First initial, last name, JKUHN at MWISD. That's Mineral Wells, MWISD.net.
Awesome. Outstanding. Okay. Thank you again. And so we're going to close out this topic here. And thank you all for our listeners.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for our next speaker.